I've been working with someone called Steve Farmer, who's also presenting on this conference. So he works with BU, so he's a clinical psychologist, and he has a very in-depth knowledge of PBS, and he's been supporting my understanding of PBS. It's something that's new to me, but it's something we're looking to roll out across the academy from September. It's quite a big undertaking. It's really, to try and summarise it, positive behaviour support is a framework that promotes a culture around behaviour. So often with behaviour, we just see the behaviour. What we try to, was mentioned Team Teach. When we look at Team Teach, we do look at understanding the function of behaviour. But what PBS does is really kind of drill down on the functions of behaviour, and creating a culture where we try to spend more time trying to focus on what we can do to create the conditions for positive behaviour, rather than focusing on the condition. Focusing on looking for what blaming mindsets, environments, systems for behaviour. So although that's important to develop our understanding of why certain behaviours do or do not happen, it's really a push about a mindset in an environment to look to do everything we can do to create the best conditions for young people and everyone to prosper. If you think about it as if we think about young learners as plants, it's making sure that we're good at doing the watering and the pruning back and things like that. But it's just making sure that we pay close attention to the soil conditions, really. The things that they're rooted in, making sure that those conditions are best suit their needs, and we're always putting the nutrients back into the soil, really, to promote growth. So that's what kind of PBS looks into. What I really like about PBS in terms of what I've learned through working with Steve is this idea that so I've just skipped a few slides there. I want to bring you to this slide. It frames behaviour, and it looks at, instead of saying challenging behaviour, it focuses on trying to make the language as positive as possible. So instead of saying challenging behaviour, it would say behaviours of concern, and that evokes a little bit more thought around behaviour and how we can support that, and it talks about how that affects quality of life. So when we see young people with that display behaviours of concern, what we're looking at is a young person where their quality of life has been affected, and therefore what can we do to support that, if that makes sense. And in doing that, we see behaviours of concern decreasing. So that's kind of the overarching principles of PBS. So I'm actually on a call later this afternoon to arrange training for the senior leadership team in September. The whole program staff to be trained up on. But yeah, that's PBS, and it's different. It will complement the existing strategies that we have, and it will develop and add an extra layer. And the hope is that it just provokes a lot more thought around behaviour, and as practitioners, not just in Sevendale but beyond, really promotes this multi-agency approach into getting a full understanding of why behaviours occurs and what that means to that young person. Do you have any questions at the moment?
No, that all makes sense, thanks.
Okay, so if you do get the chance, if you haven't looked at, so Steve Farmer I believe he's done a session on the conference around PBS, so that's why I haven't gone too much into it because it's not my expertise yet. But I know that Steve's done a session, so if you haven't had a chance to see that, I would recommend watching the video. He's really knowledgeable about it, and he really put some abstract concepts into a way that's, it's very easy to understand, and a way that you can impact our practice. So I would recommend a watch if you haven't attended the Steve's conference. Okay, so just a quick thing on PERMA. So PERMA was a paper, I believe I think it was early 2000, and that influenced the PBS model, and it's something that really struck a chord with me because he looks at these concepts here. So positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And when in the paper, it talks about, again, looking at behaviour from a different angle, in terms of what we all need, what we all want in terms of what we want from our life. What do happy people look like? What does happiness mean? Well-being, and that should be our ultimate goal, shouldn't it? For ourselves and our young people support, is that they're happy and content with themselves. So it looks at these key principles: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. So this is kind of influencing my thinking in terms of moving forward with the strategies and the policies and the approaches we take around supporting behaviour in school. So for me, what that would look like is in terms of, when we're building provisions and day-to-day learning for these young people, it's making sure that we're making the efforts to understand, these different elements for that young person. So, what do their relationships look like? What is a positive relationship to them? How can we give meaning to the work they do, the activities they do, their time in school, and how can we give meaning to their accomplishments? How do we celebrate those accomplishments? So all those things, because sometimes which I'll talk about a little bit later, with curriculums, we launched our curriculums and doing some great work with those, but we always have to be mindful that we're not imposing an agenda that is just meeting the needs of society as it is. Because my feeling is around society, yes, it's come a long way in terms of how we support young people with additional needs. Inclusivity has come a long way, and there's lots of things on the agenda, but I still think we've got a long way to go. In terms of when we access society and when we look at these behaviours, sometimes my fear is that we're looking at it through our own lens, and as neurotypical people working with non-neurotypical people, sometimes I think we should work harder to understand that and not base. Sometimes we base our opinions and our approaches and our strategies on our own experiences. That my feeling is that we shouldn't do that, because we interact and explore the world and the environment in different ways, because our brains on a scientific level operate differently, if that makes sense. and that's a lot of the work that Steve Farmer does, and is helping myself and colleagues in Sevendale develop that further understanding, and that starts to lead in and tip into things like attachment theory, so really building up our understanding of how the brain functions, and how a non-neurotypical brain will function differently to our own, if that makes sense. Any questions?
Paddy, can I just ask, what's a quick sort of attachment theory? What a quick meaning of that? What is that?
So attachment theory is it's something. It's an approach that really understands, looks deep about how the brain has developed, and it talks about how adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs, can affect the brain and the development, young people's development, in terms of how they build relationships, how they maintain relationships, and how that affects behaviour. So we work with some psychologists on that. They deliver training in school on an annual basis, and then we have some specific young children. It's normally around things like so it's where the brain hasn't fully developed, or developed in a different way, in a different pattern to how a neurotypical brain would develop. And the research is showing that that's perhaps because of experiences, from 0 to 12 months. So sometimes, or even back into the womb. So when I'm talking about like pre-fetal alcohol syndrome, or when there hasn't been enough social interaction with the bond with the mother, that natural bond, the science behind that. So it's where those really, the first 12 to 24 months, the development in relationships and bonds have not been successful. We normally see that in young people that have been fostered or given up at birth and things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's great. I kind of think it was the opposite. I was thinking it was clingy, but no, it's not.
No, so it's there's different levels of it, and again, so I mean it's a really good question actually, because what we need to do as a school to get better at is pulling in on the expertise of other professionals. So and so for example, there has been a behaviour of someone that I've worked with, and I as the lead for behaviour couldn't make sense of all that behaviour, and then that's led me on to reaching out for support from CAMS, or now that's BU, and then when we're working with the clinical psychologist, they've got the level of expertise and the knowledge that I don't have, but having those regular dialogue and those regular meetings, it's able to shape how we work with that young person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
So it's just sometimes I think people try to, and that's why I say when as neurotypical people, we shouldn't try and make sense of, when we don't understand behaviour. Sometimes we try and fill the gaps, if that makes sense, and come to the wrong conclusion. We're doing the whole 2 and 2 and getting 5, rather than going, okay, that's a gap in my knowledge. I can't make sense of that. Let's find someone that has that deeper level of understanding that's going to help us make sense of that, and that helps us make better decisions and build better provisions moving forward for these young people. Is that okay?
Yeah, Sproul. Yeah, thank you.
Super. Okay, so this is taken from this little slide here. Is taken from the PERMA paper. It's an exercise that you can do, but what I've taken from this is that it places real emphasis on values, and it's made me think about, sometimes I wonder if we do enough with our young people to try and tap in and understand what their values are, what motivates them. I think we do it well on a superficial level in terms of, likes and dislikes, what cartoons are like, what toys are like, but in terms of, what drives people and what, in terms of values and what they want to achieve, it's different. And I know from my own experience, when my colleagues and my family and my life have worked to understand my values and relate to those, that's helped me progress in life and become a more rounded individual and happy with what I'm doing, and help me learn about myself. And it struck a chord with me because and I can see it will be challenging, but I think we should be doing more for our young people, and not letting their additional needs mask that, if that makes sense. I think there should be more effort into really getting to know these people on a real individual basis, and being driven by what motivates them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's kind of a bit like where hopefully society's moving, that there's greater understanding of things that are maybe slightly different, and greater understanding always brings movement forward, generally, for
Yes.
everybody, I think. So yeah, I think it's good.
So I think I recognise it's challenging, but I just it's just where we're missing a little bit of a trick, I think, and I think that's why I'm really kind of excited about PBS. It's going to give us this different angle that I don't think we look at enough. So yeah, that's a little bit on PERMA. So that was just another quote that I took from there, in terms of again, just made me think about, when we're making decisions on a daily basis, it's always motivated from something within, isn't it? Again, it's just this idea of just trying to capture and understand that for our young people. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look at the education system in a very broad sense. So this is somewhat, I've taken a couple of quotes, a couple of screenshots from the work of called Ken Robinson. So he did a lot of work about reforming the education system, and he talks about how originally the education system came about to kind of meet the needs of the Industrial Revolution, and as a society we probably should do more in terms, although it's been reformed, the education system on a few occasions, we don't do it enough, and there's probably lots of work we should do on that. So I'm just going to talk through some examples that again made me think about how that affects behaviour in schools and in society, and what I think we should be thinking about. And so one of his big principles that he talks about is the value of subjects like the arts, music, dance, art, expressive design and things like that are always the least prioritised in any education system across the world. The emphasis is always English, maths, and your sciences, and these graphics kind of just give just kind of show that. We see English and maths at the top there as what people perceive as the most important. And what he talks about is how when you're at school, when you're at school, and the idea of becoming a musician or artist is often poo-pooed, because you're not going to get a living being a musician. That's often the consensus. It's rare where people, where young people are really encouraged to do that. So they might be encouraged in terms of enrichment activities, but in terms of dedicating time of their provision to allowing them to pursue a interest and something that they're good at is hindered by an education system that is designed to make a workforce for the future, if that makes sense. So he talks about, so this little image here, he's talking about that it's propped up from an economical point of view and an intellectual point of view, where, and I don't think it's so bad now, but there was certainly a time where, you know, academic subjects and academia was prioritized over, you know, the practical subjects, the more creative subjects, and that perhaps made you know, it didn't appeal to the creative type, so it wasn't fair or inclusive, and only catered for, you know, a certain proportion of the population, and it, you know, it contributed to the young people, you know, not being engaged and not getting the best out of their years at school, and, you know, impacted on their, you know, on their self-esteem and mental health. Do you see what I'm saying there, or do I need to explain that better?
No, that makes sense.
And again, so it's just, again, it just make me think about, you know, when we design these curriculums, or anything we do within provision, it really has got to be driven by the, you know, the motivations of our young people, and, you know, and we've got to have an eye on the you know, what society, what they want when they go into society. Do you know what I mean? And we all want different things, and what it's saying is the education system sometimes just it kind of forces you can force young people into a, you know, into a certain career, really. Well, actually, that might not be the thing that, you know, gives them happiness and fulfillment. So it's just those thoughts in terms of what we do in the classroom should be driven by, you know, the needs and the wants of these young people, and I think we need to do a better job at unpicking that and learning about that. And the other thing that struck a chord with me that I thought actually we don't think about that enough is that today, you know, when we don't get engaged people in the classroom, and they're distracted, and you know, they're not following a pathway that we've created. It's easy to blame their behaviour, their lack of attention, or their lack of interest. And what he points out is today there's so many more distractions, such as social media, Xbox, iPhones, and all those things that are competing for competing with those young people's attention, and there's nothing they can do about that. That's the world that we've created. That's the world we live in. So, you know, what we deliver in the classroom needs to look different, because it's competing against, you know, more stimuluses, if that makes sense. So it's just, you know, being aware of that, and not just trying to suppress those challenges, you know, and seeing those challenges, or what we perceive as challenges. Actually, these were part of young people's lives. You know, social media is now a part of young people's lives. Xboxes are part of young people's lives. You know, mobile phones are, and we still need to be careful about how they are part of people's lives, but it's just making sure, you know, what we can't do is just say that they don't exist, if that makes sense. And then it's this idea, these pictures down here, kind of depicting schools as factories, in terms of, you know, they're all, everyone's put into less so in SEN actually, but, you know, we put young people in these boxes where of age, they learn in a certain way, and of course some people might learn better in indoor, outdoor, big groups, small groups, individuals, but, you know, they're not really those needs and those conditions that they get the best out of young people aren't always catered for. So if you learn while in big groups and are very social, and I'm an extrovert person, then school's really going to be, the traditional school model is going to be a great model for you. But if you're introvert like myself and prefer, smaller groups or individual tasks, then a big classroom, you're already daunted, and you're already facing challenges that your counterpart might not be. So again, it's just throwing up those ideas about, and I know we have to be realistic, and I know that we've got to work within certain constraints, but it's just recognizing that those constraints are there, and we can approach provision differently. We've got to get close to their needs and their personalities, and their personality traits and their genetic makeup as best we can. So they're the thought, my thought. Well, they're Ken Robinson's thoughts, but they were very pertinent to me. And kind of made me think about what our classrooms look like, and I really push for our teachers to be reflective in what they're doing on a daily, minute by minute basis. My stance is when we have a behaviour, what have we done? What have we done wrong? What have Sevendale done wrong? And that's not about being hypocritical. That's about, okay, we need to do something different then, and that and it's having that reflective attitude to want to improve and want to learn. Those nuances about young people and their needs and their makeup to get the best of all conditions so they can prosper. Any questions on that? Okay, I'll move forward. So this slide here is just a little bit of a story that kind of gives an example of where the constraints of if we dictate too much by the constraints of a system, where we can either get it wrong or get it right. So I don't know if anyone recognises this lady. Her name is Gillian Lynn. And what this slide is depicting is back in she was accessing her education in the 1930s. She was perceived to be a naughty girl at school because the way she accessed the environment and thrived in that environment, or didn't thrive in that environment, was different to her peers. She didn't sit still. She moved around a lot, and that concerned her teachers and her families, her family, which resulted in her being referred to the doctor. So, because they saw her behaviour as abnormal and and not in line with what was expected. What the doctor did is took the parents out of the room, popped on the radio, and just asked them to watch, what this young person was doing. And what she did was have a dance, danced around the room. And the doctor explained that there's nothing wrong with your daughter. She's a dancer, so that means that she learns in a different way. She sitting down for long periods of time doesn't enlighten her, doesn't wake her up. What she needs to do, she needs to move. That's how she learns. So she doesn't need medicine. She needs to go to dance school. So Gillian went to dance school, and she talked about how much she loved it because she was surrounded with people that were like her, that people that understood her, that people experienced the world in the same way as her, and they could share those experiences. She then went on to the Royal School, Royal Ballet School, and she met Andrew Lloyd Webber, and she produced, directed, and starred in Cats. Now, the point of that is, if we'd gone down that line of seeing her behaviour as a problem and challenging them, not trying to understand that, then that could have had very different consequences. So, I just, I think that story, I quite like that story in terms of, how it provokes thoughts and how it makes us think about behaviour. And also, so just to start bringing this section around the education system, what Ken Robinson talks about, which was very pertinent with me. So the thing with when with the education system, we're not careful, if we're not appealing to the likes and the interests and the talents of young people that we try through the education system, and the emphasis is on just the skills that are needed to secure a job, then we kind of mind their minds away, if that makes sense, because they're not accessing and doing things that they enjoy, that motivates them, that gives them purpose, that gives them fulfillment, all that stuff that we mentioned in the PERMA model. And he suggests that's why we see more prevalence in the cases of mental health, and especially in young people these days. So again, that's just something that made me think in terms of how pertinent provision, curriculum, pedagogy is to a young person's well-being and behaviour. So he talks about this saying, which I quite like. So he said, Picasso says, everyone is born an artist, but the problem is remaining an artist. So it's this idea that the education system, in terms of trying to meet the demands of producing a workforce of the future, we strip, we run the risk of stripping away young people's likes, interests, in order to meet the needs of the economy of the future. And this, for me, this is something that concerns me. And thankfully, I think we are. There's lots of work out there that we're moving in the right direction, but it's just something we should be mindful of. And I just think especially in an environment like ours, when we talk about curriculum and the importance of the curriculum and assessment and all these things, it's useful, it's needed, but we shouldn't just be dictators and driven by that. We need to keep asking the question, what are we here? What are we here to achieve? How are we helping these young people? And how are we going to do what we need to do to support them for their futures? Is there any questions on that?
No, that's fine, thanks.
Okay, so we've still got a little bit of time actually. So, and this is just a quote that I took from Ken Robinson. That again, just it's quite pertinent in terms of what we're doing in classrooms, what we do in schools, what we do in society. Just his work. Poses a lot of really interesting questions for me. Okay, so I'm going to move on to now. This is really thinking outside the box. So I'm currently studying for a master's in terms of and the kind of stuff we do actually is about the business end of running the school. In one of my modules, I came across this chap. He's a French, I don't know how to describe him, like economic. He does economics. He does a lot of consultancy for big companies like Google, and kind of getting the best out of a workforce. And he did a paper about how too many rules keep you from getting things done. And it really resonated with me, and again, it's stuff that I think we can learn from in schools and in classrooms. So these next few slides are kind of talking about our workforce and and colleagues. But my thinking is I look at classrooms as when we come to work, we come to work 9 till 3, 9 till 4, and that's our jobs, that's our careers. So I see school as our young people, that's their career, isn't it? At that stage of life. And what we're looking for is productivity in the classroom, and productivity is about getting the best. He talks about getting the best out of your workforce and how to do that. So what I want to do is just take these thoughts and ideas into the classroom, but very much viewing our young people and our children as a workforce, and the classroom as the workplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So I'll move on to talk about what you said. He talks about productivity is the principal driver of prosperity for society. So it's so he talks about when productivity grows 3% per annum, it doubles the standard of living for every generation, and when it grows only 1%, that takes 3 generations. So on this later model here, there's 1%. That means that the next generation are worse off than us. So in terms of that, just kind of give context to his thinking about why productivity is important, and why we should value it, and why we should do what we can do to create high levels of productivity. So the way I'm looking at that is productivity in the classroom, and productivity is the output that we want for our young people, and that's different. It's different for all individuals. So he talks about all the problems that we face, and he basically talks about that these are rooted in the productivity crisis. And what we're going to talk about is that how too many rules sometimes can be counterproductive. I found his work really inspiring in terms of what we can do in classrooms. So he talks about the basic, how the crisis, this productivity crisis, is about the efficiency and the effectiveness in management, in public services, just in everything we do in investment. But it talks about how it can become counterproductive for human efforts, and sometimes when in classrooms, when we're trying to oppose our agendas and we're not thinking about them carefully, it can be counterproductive for our young people, because we've got to keep their needs, their thoughts, their interests has got to be central of what we do. And just sometimes we run the risk of delivering a provision, because that's what the curriculum is saying. But the curriculum just should be there to guide us to capture and meet the needs of the young people. And I think that's why the EHCP is important in those targets, to make sure we capture what's important for that young person. So so he talks about the holy trinity of efficiency, and he talks about that in organizations, in workplaces, we have clarity, measurement, and accountability. Okay, so it's these set of rules, and they might look different in classrooms, but the idea of having these sets of rules and these sets of parameters, he talks about how sometimes that can stifle the productivity of your workforce, your colleagues. So that's what we're going to kind of come on to now. So he talks about this idea that it derails human efforts. So his big thing is about cooperation, and that's what I've really what I've taken from his paper. And that's what what I want to promote to our teachers in our classroom is that, you know, we cooperate with our young people. Do you know what I mean? It's give and take, and we work closely with them together to reach the best outcomes together. So a really good example of this is he talks about a relay race. So it's the final, and you got the French relay team and the American relay team, and individually the French team are a lot faster. So these are their times here. So I think three out of the four are faster than the French, and two of them are world record holders. So based on you know these numbers, these measurements of people's performance, the American team should win the race. So they should arrive at the finish line, you know, 3.2 meters faster than the French team. But what happened? The fastest team didn't win. The slower team did win, and it's what that's about. And this is where we start to really dig down to, you know, the benefits of cooperation. So the French team carried the baton slower. So individually, they carried, you know, when they're running their legs, they carried it. They're running slower, but the baton travels faster. So it's this idea of, you know, human efforts, relationships, cooperation, you know, yields better results. You know, each effort of the French relay team, their efforts contributed to others. So in terms of what would happen in this relay race if we started to bring in these measurements of like clarity, accountability, measuring performance. We then look at what would have happened to the French relay team. So they, you know, he talks about, in terms of cooperation, when they're passing the baton, you know, their energy is in shouting at their teammate, focusing on where they're passing that baton, and, you know, a lot of energy is spent on that exchange, and their energy is taken out their legs. So that makes their individual performance not their best performance. That makes sense. But he's talking about the American relay team. They're just why they didn't win the race was because they were just concentrating on individual performance, in terms of just run as fast as I can. But that meant there was less cooperation, you know, less effort, less energy put into those changeovers. So as a team, you know, they were less successful. So where I think that relates to the classroom again is just, you know, working together, you know, seeing young people as people, you know, not, you know, sometimes, you know, we don't just have to, you know, we don't just have to look at them as children. Let's look at them as people that we can work with, like we would work with our colleagues. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
So so what he talks about, so what happens when clarity and management and accountability appears. So for, you know, if we're looking for clarity, so my role as a relay runner, right? So we're doing a 4x400 meter relay. So where does my role start and where does it finish? Okay, do I run 95 meters? Do I run 96 meters? So what we're saying, if when we're using these metrics to measure things and put frameworks in place and kind of micromanage situations, then, you know, what we're getting with the American ones is that, okay, they run 96 meters and they just drop the baton regardless of someone's there or not, because they're working towards these rules, these frameworks. So I've done my bit. And then when we look at accountability, it's saying that, you know, if we went on that model, then we would look at having someone responsible just for passing the baton. So instead of just having 4 runners, you would have someone's responsible for running and someone's responsible for passing the baton between runners. And then we get into this, and you're saying that we get into this idea where we pay more attention to who or what to blame rather than focusing what we need to do to create the conditions to succeed. Does that make sense? So when we start imposing too many rules, and it can be counterproductive, if that makes sense. And sometimes I think that's what we need to be mindful in classrooms when we're working with young people. And in terms of where if we spend too much focus on a measurement, essentially what gets measured gets done. But what doesn't happen is this cooperation about how we pass the baton. So to pass the baton, you need to be passing it at the right time, at the right speed. So this is what I just talked about before. In order for this to happen, you're taking your energy away from your legs and putting it in your arms, in your voice, to cooperate with your colleague or your teammate. But that's at the expense of your own measurable speed. So if we focus on just measurements and these key performance indicators, it doesn't lend itself to a cooperative approach. So I just found that really interesting, and thought that's something that we can take into our classrooms and how we work with our young people. Because sometimes when we see, or a lot of the time when we see behaviour, it's through frustration, and that may be because they're spending times and efforts on something that they're not getting anything out of. They're not seeing the value of it. So what we should be doing is working with those young people to work out what they do get value out of. What is meaningful to them. So I thought it's an interesting way to look at behaviour. If we look at our young people as our as colleagues in a workforce, and we're wanting to get the best out of them, and we're wanting productivity in the classroom. If we just have a balance of where we're not putting too many things in place that can constrict them, then I feel like we will. It will lead to more prosperous things, if that makes sense. So it's just this idea, of making sure you're directing your own energy and the energy of the young people that you're responsible for on things that's going to benefit them. And it's the idea that we've got to create an environment where that young person is going to get something out of it from engaging in it. If engaging in it means they're going to be worse off, then we need to understand and learn from that. I hope that does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
So, and I know it's a little bit out of the box in terms of it's not education, but I found it really interesting, and I really do think that's something that we can take forward into our classrooms to support our young people. So what I'll do now, I've just got, so I've been way better on this one than I did this morning. So I'll do a little bit, just try and do that last 9 minutes, cover a little bit on Team Teach. So do you have any questions of anything I've discussed so far?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so I'll just quickly. Okay, so Team Teach. And so Team Teach is a behaviour management strategy that we use in school, and it's something that we have to be accredited for. So I have to go on training. Me and two or three other colleagues go on training every year to be able to deliver training to our staff, and our staff have to be trained every 2 years. Training consists of so when someone's new to the training, it's 2 days, and then a refresher training happens every 2 years and lasts a year. So team teach is, essentially its principles are about 95% de-escalation, but we will have occasions where we might need to intervene using physical intervention, or what's called a physical restrictive intervention, and that's what a lot of the training is about, as well as making sure that so we use techniques that it's the same techniques that is using that people in hospitals and so forth trained with. So the techniques are they're not based on strength or force, they're based on the mechanics of the body. Does that make sense? So and we use those only if they're reasonable, proportionate and necessary. So that would be to keep an individual safe, so keep them safe from themselves. So sometimes we have some young people where they might self-harm, head banging, for instance. So we obviously are duty to keep them safe, so we might use a physical intervention then. And also if it's about keeping others safe, others around them safe. So what I'm going to do, I will talk about the arousal curve in terms of where our behaviour support plans come from. So this is called the arousal curve. So down here, this is where we have where we're in our well, just below here is where we're in our best state of mind, and then if we get, it's kind of the pattern we go through when we our emotions, we're not regulating our emotions. So so when I'm driving home and someone cuts me up and I might get angry, I might behave a little bit irrationally, I might shout or something like that. So and I get stressed. So that's, that might be my crisis point. But obviously, but what I've got is strategies, obviously, to manage my emotions. But a lot of our young people, they don't have those strategies, and a lot of the time that's because of they're, we've talked about neurotypical and non-neurotypical brains, and again, environments and situations are a lot more challenging for them than they are for us, and that can lead to these outbursts where they're unable to regulate their emotions. So it's at this point we might use a restrictive physical intervention, because they might be at risk of harming themselves or others. It's a last resort, so obviously we try and talk them down, but at this point, anyone that's in crisis mode will not behaving rationally at that point. And the analogy I like is, you can't teach a drowning man to swim. That's the wrong time to do it, isn't it? So at this point, your priority is to look after them, keep them safe, and bring them back down into this area where they're emotionally safe. So here we might start to see triggers, things that tell us that actually this person is struggling right now, and we might try strategies to de-escalate them. So that might be one that's always worked for me. So I remember when I was teaching, I had a couple in my class, we just went outside and kicked a board about. It burned a bit of burn a bit of pent-up energy. It was a distraction. Sometimes humour works. Sometimes giving them a job to do. You can giving them a little lemon to run. For some of our more complex learners, it might be a sensory resource. They just might need some time out and some space. So most of our classrooms have a breakout space, so that's areas that they can go and spend some time to get their thoughts together and re-regulate. We're looking at trying to get some other spaces outside, so they can maybe step outside for 10-15 minutes to get themselves together and remove themselves from that environment if that's what's causing their anxiety. And this bit down here, what's important that we do. So, we've had a crisis, we've managed it, we've brought them back down, and they're in a better frame of mind. But it's making sure that we understand why that's happened and reflect on what we do. Do we need to change anything for tomorrow? Do we need to start looking at getting other services in art? What's the function of this behaviour? What's the cause of it? What was their cause of their anxiety? So what we have what we call debriefs to try and really unpick that and understand that and work out what we need to change to keep this this young person down here. If that makes sense. And then the restoration process is making sure that we're getting that young person in absolutely the right frame of mind before they enter back into the classroom or into their provision. So often that will be our pastoral care. They might need a couple of days out of the classroom, and then we might do work with a pastoral teacher. They might do some nurture activities. It might be we had one of our young people recently. He hurt his teacher, unfortunately, in an incident where he was unable to regulate. But part of that restoration process, we kind of talked to him about how he was feeling and why he did what he did. He couldn't really explain that, but he was very remorseful and really sad about what he had done. So he made a video to say sorry to his teacher, and that made him feel better and gain some control of that situation. And what we're doing is recognizing that this young person's got really some really complex needs and some complex needs in his wider life, and we're working with agencies to understand that behavior, because this young person goes from here to here very quickly, and then when he comes back out of here, he's really upset, really remorseful, and can't always remember what's happened here. So it's just this idea of that we need to collect every bit of information to understand the situation as best we can. Now, to support this, so that's a typical pattern of a behaviour in terms of when it escalates and comes back out. So we have before quickly close it off, I want to mention what we would do. That there's no room for punitive action when we're dealing with behaviours. I'm very clear on that. There's a difference between consequence and punitive action. Okay, so a young person might have a big behaviour and damage some property or do something in the classroom they shouldn't do. So we might remove them from that classroom with the view of we work with them to get them ready to go back into that classroom where it's going to be productive for them and the young people around them, rather than what we're not doing is taking them out of that classroom for punishment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So so I'm very, there's no room for punitive measures. Anything that we do after a behaviour, it's a productive. It's about what I've talked about, making alterations to the soil, getting the conditions right, and that might mean a couple of days out of the classroom. And sometimes, fortunately, it doesn't happen very often at all here. But on the occasion where we've had to do maybe a fixed term exclusion, again, that is not a punitive measure. that's about saying, actually, something's changed in this young person's circumstances, where the provision that we are providing from today hasn't worked. So we need to do something different. So when we do that, that's about giving us a time frame to quickly put things into place. So that might be a classroom move, that might be alteration to provision, that might be a bit of an individualist timetable for a certain amount of time. It might be to start looking at other provisions, but it's never a punitive measure. So I just wanted to kind of stress that. So then what we have in school now is we have what we call green ready to learn plans. So I've got an example of one, like, forgive me because this is a screenshot and I've taken names off. So every teacher has a ready to learn plan for all their pupils in their class, and it just asks a few questions, basic questions, to make them think about the provision. So it looks like what best suits, you know, Bob's what for Bob. We were looking at classroom setup. So does he learn best when it's child-led or a combination of adult-child or adult-led? Then we look at communication. Do we use Macarthur signs? Do we use gesture? Do we use simple sentences? Do we use 2 or 3 words? Do we use extended sentences? General strategies we look at, you know, does he like a quiet environment? Do we need a calm voice? Does it need to be practical activities? And again, we look at resources. What resources best engage? Visual, sensory, low stimulus. You know, it just asks questions for teachers to answer, just to give them a bit of a basis, you know, to creating those the correct soil conditions. And we look at, you know, and also like learning space. Is it free flow, outside, carousel of activities, a workstation? You know, so that's what a ready to learn plan would look like. And we encourage teachers, teaching assistants to, you know, to update that on a regular basis to reflect on that based on what we learn. Sometimes I think people think that young people present differently. Sometimes I think actually no, we're just starting to get to know them, and we're doing a better job of learning about them. But whichever way it is, we shouldn't be standing still on these things. You know, it's getting to know them. You know, and it's that idea, you know, adapting that new bit of information that you've learned. You know, adopting that new bit of information that you've learned, adapting what you're doing, and improving the situation. And then what we have, so this is, you know, the green. You know, what I talk about is trying to keep young people in the green. This is, you know, the stuff, you know, the perma stuff, the stuff that keeps them happy, that motivates them, and you know, it's the correct soil conditions. So then we have amber and red plans. So amber is where the curve is starting to rise, and that's called a re-engagement plan. And that's again a plan for an individual, and it will have a list of information of what they might look like when they're starting to disengage. So and that's all individual. And then what strategies we put in place to kind of get them back into the green rather than going into the red. So that would, you know, you might need to go for a walk on the corridor. They might need 5 minutes on the iPad in the quiet room. They might need to play with some. They might want a weighted blanket. A change of face often helps. You might have a favourite teacher that can go and spend 5 minutes with. You know, anything that's going to, you know, distract them and bring them back in. So they're ready to learn. You know, in terms of when someone's dysregulated, then, you know, the learning comes second then. So when we start to see this dysregulated behaviour, you know, anxiety, emotions rise, you know, it's the young person's, you know, emotional well-being is deprived, and, you know, learning can pause for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half a day, whatever it needs to, in order to get them into that best space. And then the work that goes on around that is we're reflecting what we're doing as a provision in the classroom, out classroom, as a school, wherever it needs to be, if that makes sense. And then finally we have what we call the additional support plan. So that's where if we needed to use the restrictive physical interventions that we talked about, and if that was the case, we thankfully we don't have too many of these, but these are produced in collaboration with parents, carers, class teams, the professionals that are working with them. And again, it just details, what type of behaviours will be exhibited, what are the best strategies that we can use, and the restrictive physical interventions that we can use, and then what we need to do after the blue bit. That's really important, the restoration bit. So we don't just come out of we don't allow children just to come out of crisis and then just go, okay, you finished now, let's go back to learning, let's go back to the classroom, let's go back to what you're doing. It's trying to unpack that and support them, and send them home or into their next lesson in the best frame of mind, and obviously using that opportunity for us to learn and adapt whatever we're doing. So that kind of concludes my presentation today. Is there any other questions at all?
No.
Okay.
That was really good, Paddy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really interesting. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you for attending. And have a good weekend and a good half term.
You too. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. See you later.
See you later.
Bye bye.